So from that moment, from 1945, from the end of the war to the end of really the 20th century, I mean 1989, 1991, kind of the ripple effects to the end of the century. That's what sets the tone. It is the Cold War. It dominates everything, and it's just like World War II was a reformulation and continuation of World War One. The Cold War is that of World War II. And it's fought out in a kind of unpredictable and, well, sad, but also somewhat interesting kind of way, very unconventionally. And then when that ends, war shifts to this like global terror, getting kind of neo colonial holding around the world between America, kind of China, Russia, and India, and maybe the EU is like a block. Like, well, that's weird too. Like, couldn't have expected that. So, yeah, wars produce all kinds of aftermath, but it's usually a lot of blowback, like the unintended consequences of what was going to happen. And like they said it there, like it turns out, well, that probably was a little bit overinflated, what the Soviets' capabilities and maybe their intent. Because like, yeah, Stalin was, he was, he was like conservative in the sense of he was a dictator. He was kind of conservative the way Trump's conservative. Like, he'll use law and order and suppression and like snuff out enemies and like not freedoms, not rights, not communism. Like Stalinism's not, it's not communism at all. It's just like a socialist form of dictatorship, really. But he was really paranoid, like they said. So kind of like Truman gets paranoid. He was trying to shore up his borders, just like after World War One and after some of the other stuff that happened with Napoleon. They were like, we got to build up another buffer state because they're coming back, the Germans or the French or the British or all of them. Like that's the worldview of like people that live in Russia still today. Like that's just how they think because they've lost millions and millions and millions of people. And when that kind of a thing happens, it doesn't like drift off into the past the same way other stuff that happens generationally for our grandparents and great grandparents does. It's kind of like something akin to the Holocaust where it's like, oh no, everybody's going to know about that. That if you're Jewish, you're definitely going to know about it and a lot about it probably. And it's going to really shape how you feel about being in the world. So, when we're talking about worldviews, I think that's one of the biggest things Americans, and not just Americans, but probably most every country, failed to do much of in the 20th century and maybe maybe the 21st century still. But certainly then of like Americans were thinking about the Russians in terms of Americanism and American ideas about individualism and private property and the way that they're looking at the world. They weren't thinking of any historic enemies that would like try to wipe them out off the face of the earth, but Russian people have, and they think about that, and they continue to because it's such a formative part of their worldview. So, we have the hindsight of history and going, oh, okay, we understand that more a little bit now. After the Cold War, a bunch of stuff got declassified. It shines a lot of light on things. Oh, China and Russia really weren't as close as we thought they were. But we didn't know that back then. It's not like all the things that are listed. It's not like we knew that about all of them or the effects of what they would be, which is good to keep in mind when we're talking about bad things that happen, right? Like, oh, that was a bad call. Okay, America shouldn't have done that. Oh, the Soviet Union definitely shouldn't have done. They shouldn't have forced the Czech Republic to not take money and then keep them poor and punish them. Like, that's not cool. Like, but some of those are like, well, I don't know what call I'd make if I was in Stalin's shoes or, Truman's or anybody else's at the time. So, yeah. So, with the kind of hindsight of knowing these things, we see, oh, okay, this is probably where we really erred. And a lot of that was in terms of the other person's worldview, thinking they were seeing the world the same way, or that they wanted the same things out of the future, or anything like that. And as we've seen, like with the Cold War, really at the end of the day, kind of what won is perception. And that's why perception is like such an important part of like the Cold War. Even think about the Olympics. I don't know if some of you are, my age or older or a little younger, and like maybe remember some of that Olympics, between the like 50s and 80s. Oh man, it was tense. Like that was.
You were right. After the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, he refused to attend the Olympics, like as a protest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we boycotted the 1980 Olympics because the Soviet Union had invaded Afghanistan, which was kind of like we actually instigated it. We were like the foreign kind of arm of the CIA was like, well, we gotta give the Soviet Union their own Vietnam because Vietnam sucks. And this is a little bit of the thinking behind Ronald Reagan's campaign of Make America Great Again, because he said that America needs to, quote unquote, beat the Vietnam syndrome, that we're losers, that America is not a loser. America doesn't lose a war. We didn't lose any war. Oh, okay, so apparently we just tell ourselves this and then it's true. It's like, is Vietnam a communist country? Yeah? Okay, I'm pretty sure we lost. I'm pretty sure we lost that one. North Korea, we called it a tie. It was a 0-0 soccer game, but Vietnam was a clear defeat, and it was a really costly one, and it unraveled a lot in American society and culture, but it all springs from the Cold War. So not only do you have all these things in Western Europe, or Western and Eastern Europe, and kind of this budding, secrecy spy network, you have things that are birthed like the CIA, who go and instigate stuff like the Afghanistan war, where we train the freedom fighters, the Mujahideen, Osama bin Laden, like he was one of those
Bin
guys.
Laden.
Yeah, like we gave him weapons, we trained him, we told him, we were like, yeah, we got this. So
Here's how you shoot down Soviet helicopters with a rocket launcher, and here's how you hijack a plane. Back to back.
Yeah, I know we.
what was that? Okay, I thought I heard somebody else commenting on. So, this is, we do these things thinking we can control the course of, the future of the world. And indeed, we definitely did. We stopped communism from spreading in a whole bunch of places, which on a capitalism level is good for America, right? Like, okay, cool. We've kind of contained global dominance of the economy and kind of dictating what's going to happen here. But on a democracy level for America is not good, because how we did that in almost all of the cases was highly illegal and highly unconstitutional. And a lot of times, lawmakers would go and give themselves permission after the fact. It's easier to say, ask for forgiveness than ask for permission, right? Like Truman didn't use Congress to, like Congress can declare war, the president can't. Like you cannot do that. Like the government has to agree to do that. One person can't do that. But they can create situations that will put us at war and give the president, some power to do that, or the ability to get the sign off from Congress. But Truman just used the UN, the peacekeeping group, to kind of justify containing communism in the name of peace. And I believe in both the cases of Korea and Vietnam that are divided north and south, communism and capitalism, democracy and communism in the north, in both countries, former colonies of Japan, and in the case of Vietnam, French before that. So the power vacuum happens. The people that kind of go in to fill it are kind of in different camps and have had different presence in there. Different territories. And so in the chaos of kind of reforming these countries and governments and getting stuff up and running, the U.S. is funding, the programs to get the kind of like democratic capitalism system up in the areas that the U.S. has control of when the war ends. And then the ones that are trying to get a kind of communist, socialist government economy up are the ones where, like, either the Japanese were in control when the war ended and it got sucked up, or the Chinese or the Soviets were in control of or got control of right after the war. So it's like, well, that makes sense. Of course they did. And so then they influenced both of those governments, and both of they've got different things going on regionally, but when it comes time to vote nationally, that's when things get postponed, shady stuff happens about the election, and then finally America gets, an agreement that the vote will be postponed for 2 years or 4 years, because they're clearly it was going to go communist. Like the country was leaning towards that, because while America was very hot to give Germany a lot of money, because Germany had been one of our biggest industrial financial partners, Southeastern Asia was not. And so communism was often more appealing to those groups, and seemed to be more, Asian based, right? That's kind of a thing that's happening in Asia. So the fear was, if one of these goes, all of them are going to start to go, and then there is real strength and power. That's the problem, where capitalism and communism are kind of diametrically opposed, because communism says, look, capitalism has to disappear. It has to give way to socialism, which then can give way to communism, because capitalism is about attaining more than anybody else, and it puts... it offers unfair but also untrue perks or advantages that will divide the world and continually try to just siphon people out through materialism, out of communism, because communism's tough. It's not it's hey, everything will get easier in your life if you do this. That wouldn't be true. That it'd be a hard adjustment, and the rich would suffer much more than anybody else. So that's one of the reasons it keeps getting shut down over and over, long before World War II happens and before the Russian Revolution. It gets shut down a lot in Europe, and it's where all those weird treaties come from, because the different countries made alliances so that they could both put down revolution in their own cities and countries. So the Russians would come in and help the Austrians, and the British would go, help the French or the Russians. This happened frequently through the second half of the 19th century. And they're all largely like socialist, communist, nationalist revolutions. 1848, to be very specific, is the main year. And then after the war, with Russia becoming a communist nation, there's a great fear in that because Russia's always been like a giant military power, even though they didn't do so hot in World War One. And then by the end of World War II, Russia suffered crazy casualties, but so they're very unified. Stalin also killed off all of the like voices that would speak up against it.
Communist intellectuals.
What's that? Yeah, the intellectuals, right? Doctors,
military leaders, and basically anyone who wasn't his lapdog.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
It's one of the reasons that Russia does so poorly, like in the second half of the 20th century, including during the beginning of the war. And they had to really rebuild all that, and it took some time. They got some of it back. Some of it they stole from the Germans, like us at the end of the war. But yeah, Stalin did crazy things because he was psychotically paranoid. But, you know, if you made a deal with Hitler for your country to get saved from, you know, global war, and then he went and invaded you after he got his tanks closer to your borders, he'd be like probably very paranoid. Coming out of World War One, especially, again, back to worldviews. So, that video, it does a great job of like covering a lot of stuff, even in terms of like civil rights and segregation. And so I want to hit pause for tonight, and this is like the buildup of the Cold War. I'll mention just, you know, kind of the big poof to the end of this first part of the Cold War actually isn't the end of the Korean War, which goes from like 50 to 52, 53. When Truman gets ousted and Eisenhower gets elected as a conservative Republican who is both much more conservative and much more liberal than Republicans today, which I will talk about in an upcoming chat about that. So yeah, by that point, it's not the end of that, and Eisenhower coming in, who's super anti-war and is like not into the CIA, and is like, you know, because he would like got into the death camps like as they were liberating them. He was at Normandy, like he was incredibly anti-war, where Harry Truman was not, and like was kind of a war hawk. It doesn't mean the foreign policy was perfect under him, because the government and the country in general were highly influenced by McCarthyism, which is kind of like the fundamentalist crazy end of the Red Scare, which is, you know, hyped in fear and in a lot of senses irrational fear. McCarthyism, much like Fox News does today with the kind of ideas of socialism and communism and how everything in America is a communist plot to overthrow the president or the government or America. That's what happened in the like late 40s and early 50s with those whack hearings, the kind of Alger Hiss and the Rosenbergs, who get Alger Hiss gets convicted of treason. The Rosenbergs get convicted of atomic treason and are executed with kind of like flimsy evidence and a lot of like, it was a very rushed trial. It was pretty crazy. Like there's a lot of stuff that goes on, and McCarthy, who's this opportunist, politician, senator, partners up with another opportunist politician who made his name on the Alger Hiss case, another kind of flimsy case that was like, this was not, well, they're literally just like arresting people and charging them and sentencing them with very little cause or justification, named Richard Nixon. So Joseph McCarthy and Richard Nixon, another young senator, I believe, they kind of make their names and become very prominent national figures to the point where in 1954, Nixon will become Eisenhower's running mate and become the vice president Sorry, 52, not 54, 52. And then he'll run after Eisenhower's for 8 years in 1960 against JFK. And then he'll come back and win in 1968 and be president from then until 1976, essentially, when he resigns from Watergate. So he keeps his nose a little bit cleaner than Joseph McCarthy. McCarthy accuses everybody foundlessly, crazy. He's always saying he has a list of conspirators, 200 known or suspected communists working in the State Department or, over here, and then on national television and some of his highly hyped up events. His hearings. He was holding a hearing into the top levels of the U.S. military, the Army, the generals. And he starts accusing all of them of being communists too. And they're like, what? And then I can't remember who it was, but it was another one of the members of the committee was like finally interrupted him. And he's like, sir, what is wrong with you? Do you have no decency? Is there no decency in you? And it was nationally televised. TV's a new phenomenon. Everybody's into it. There's not a lot of stuff on either. And this was nationally televised. And it was like, oh, Joseph McCarthy fell out of fashion real quick. And all of his, huge, gigantic support in the conservative base suddenly disavowed him and didn't actually really like him and didn't have anything to do with him. And he died like a year later, maybe, of alcoholism. He was a horrible, horrible man and a liar.
Wait, so what happened to his yes men?
Oh, they all stayed in the government. They all kept their Senate jobs and their, reporting jobs and that. Yeah.
Just like now, huh?
Yeah, it's like just you cut off the head. You're not going to get rid of all the snakes.
Right? Okay.
Yeah, which is even true for the Democrats. It's like if Joe Biden tried to clean house, there's no way he's going to get rid of, he couldn't get rid of Nancy Pelosi.
No, he couldn't.
Right? No. There's no way. He's not
right.
He's not powerful enough. Trump couldn't do it. There's no way Joe Biden could do it. So it's
exactly.
They
it's
just
the same thing with
Mitch
McConnell. We ain't gonna get rid of him.
Right. You're not gonna get rid of Lindsey Graham.
No, not ever.
Until he melts away. Yeah. Well, yeah. So yeah, that's the kind of and that just really sets the trajectory for the rest of the 20th century. This hyper, suspicious, not all without, due reason. As you saw in the Oliver Stone, episode. It's not without reason that they shouldn't have that they distrusted the Soviets and them likewise to us, right? They both had reasons to do that, and Harry Truman was not neither Henry Wallace nor Franklin Roosevelt, and there is a relational element clearly to foreign policy. It's probably the most important thing that a president could do, actually, is maybe foreign policy. That's why the Secretary of State has, especially at the beginning, was so historically important and at first considered the next successor to the presidency. And that was the second change that happened. Thomas Jefferson, he was that. He was Secretary of State and ousted the VP that was the president, John Adams. And, Hillary Clinton was that. It's probably the most important thing that the president does because it's what gets us into war, and it's what gets us trade treaties and what gets us involved in all kinds of things. The Olympics. I mean, it's not just a war. So yeah, the Cold War and kind of foreign policy and just kind of how that gets shaped. We again think of this as history, this happened, it was going to happen, but it wasn't necessarily going to happen. There's a lot of different turns that, the world could have taken, all countries, at different points in all the places we're looking at. So, that's stuff to consider as we look at kind of this next movement of history, the kind of end of the 50s, the beginning of the civil rights movement, the women's movement, JFK, the like rock and roll, the television, suburbia. There's so much change going on, and there was a lot more hope for the future still, even after World War II, than I think any of us experience today. Again, important to remember when we think about worldviews and choices people make. So I shall make some footage for that, and what I cannot make other videos of, I will cover in those audio lectures that I have recorded. They're from 4 or 5 years ago, just off my cell phone. So especially if I'm talking about anything related to assignments in those, disregard that. Pay attention to the email I'm sending out tonight, Wednesday night. Alrighty. You guys have a good Thanksgiving.